This is the 22nd season of Bass Talk Live. BTL is presented by Bass Cat Boats, Strike King Lures, AFTCO, Pro Guide Batteries, Spro, Gamakatsu, The Bass Tank, Beatdown Outdoors, and Sunline.
BTL coming at you.
Good morning, and welcome to another exciting edition of BTL Bass Talk Live, where we're going to talk about bass fishing. I have a ringing in my ears from yesterday afternoon, and that was because I turned on the final event of the BPT season, Stage 7, out of Lake Erie, and it's safe to say that that stretch of the big pond has been very kind to Justin Lucas. I did not realize it was 6 years between his major wins, and he was pretty emotional about it. But where he was fishing was by those navigational, boop, boop, every 30 seconds. I watch Bama saltwater fishing on YouTube. It's like every time he comes out, he's super cool dude. He just goes out and catches like snapper and sheep's head and stuff, and he always fishes around the oil derricks that have that tone. But yeah, Justin Lucas got the job done, 98-11 on the final day. I had a feeling Wheeler was keeping something up his sleeve to really make a run at it. You know, if Burge had made the top 10, he was going to win Angler of the Year regardless of what Wheeler had done. He needed Burge to finish like 13th, and he needed to win. Jacob Wheeler ends up finishing second, but Zach Burge gets the job done. Dude from Oklahoma who started fishing BFLs when he was 15, 16 years old, jumped into the college scene, won a college national championship, fish opens, fish FLW, fish MLF, really worked his way up and having a heck of a year, and had a heck of a year, I guess, now that it's completed. So, actually really proud, to say, I mean, Oklahoma's got some dudes, man. I mean, it started, Jimmy Houston back in the day, and Ken Cook, and Edwin Evers. You got Elon, you got a bunch of guys from Oklahoma out there, Tommy Biffle and stuff. But Zach Burge definitely at the top of the mountain right now in the cool shades and the handlebar mustache, and it looks like he could bench press about 450 pounds. But another crazy year for Jacob Wheeler. I think that's like 6 consecutive years he's either been first or second in the BPT Angler of the Year. But Lucas, if you went back, just watch the final, like he didn't have a scope on in the final period, and he had like 4 or 5 over 5 pounds. Like every time he reeled into one, it was just an absolute whale. But good to see that. I'm sure we'll have Justin on in the future. Big day today too. Headed to Mountain Home, Arkansas to lay eyes on the new links that I'm picking up for. I guess I'll have it rigged and ready to go for the EQs that start almost exactly in a month. But it's kind of weird, like when you change boats, because each boat you have like a specific attachment to. Some boats, more than others, where you think of things that have happened in that boat, or remember where you picked it up or where you were when you got it. I ran this Puma that I'm running now for the last 2 years, so I was thinking back to some of the crazy things, like tow that sucker down to Mexico with Andrew Upshaw when we fished that, and just moments. So a little bit of attachment issues to each one of the boats, but really excited to do the Bass Cat. I'm sure we'll do a walkthrough and a video on that one when we get it rigged at the Bass Tank. But if you remember, last month we had Charlie Hartley on, and there's a couple themes. Charlie Hartley always brings up a couple individuals almost every show that he talks about, and one of them is Jon Bondy. Now, if you are a bass fishing historian, you know who Jon Bondy is. One of the inaugural 2006 Bassmaster Elite Series season anglers. That was the year the Hackney Godzilla ain't got nothing on me, and the Ish Monroe with the big tube and all that stuff. And he was on it for a number of years. And I just came across the media guide for that 2006. You're looking at names, Grant Goldbeck, Paul Hurosky, Elton Luce Jr., Jimmy Houston. I mentioned him. He was actually on that 2006 season. But guys kind of come and go. It's interesting. You talk about Randy Howell left and came back, but like a John Cruz, a Randy Howell, a Bill Lowe, and guys that have been around, and Ike and Ellie, for a long time. He was competing in his supposedly his last season here. And I love catching up with those guys. It was kind of when I was getting into the game, covering it with Mark Jeffries and the Bass Zone. One of the guys that everyone really rooted for. Super nice dude, but also one of those dudes who you could tell the wheels were turning. He's pouring his own baits, making his own stuff. And then he disappeared kind of from the bass fishing scene. And then he invented, well, we'll let him tell the story. We'll bring him in here. I don't exactly know how to do it. That would be the one and only Jon Bondy from Windsor, Canada right now. What's up, John?
Hey, man. It has been a while.
It has
been a while since we've talked.
Yeah, I said I remember that. I mean, do you remember Jeffries out there busted his butt doing all the Bass Zone stuff? And at that time, like, I wasn't out there for the first year, but then when you were on tour, I was just carrying Jeffries' heavy stuff and getting yelled at.
Yeah, I remember we roomed together.
Yep.
Him and I and Smith in Virginia, Smith Mountain Lake, or
yep.
I think that's where it was.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember what a dude. He showed up and the other sites weren't showing up to these tournaments. And he was on site. And that's what made him different. And he became big fast. Everybody wanted to get interviewed by him. And yeah, I remember those days, dude. It's been a long time. And I sure miss it. I want to congratulate my buddy Charlie. He's going to get inducted into the Ohio Bass Fishing Hall of Fame, him and Bill Lowen, next month. That's got to be exciting for him, and I'm sure a lot of his buddies will be there for that in Ohio. And there's a guy, I never seen somebody so excited to go fishing.
Every time, too. It doesn't matter what it is.
And if he gets a blow up on a buzzbait or something like that, man, he'll spend an hour describing it. Describing the splash. And one thing about Charlie and I, we go back and forth about all these heroes of the sport. And when I was growing up, I worshiped these guys, and to be able to go out and compete with them, I'll never forget that first time blasting off at Amistad on the elites, like you say, the first year, and seeing all them big boys around me. They were all there, all collected on that trail, and just being a rookie, it was unbelievable. I'll never forget it.
And that was when you were rolling in the Champion in those days, correct?
You know what? I've been to Mountain Home, Arkansas, and I picked up Champions there, and that's how far back I go. I had a bunch of Champions, and there was 4 or 5 of us on the national team at towards the end of the company there, and that's the best bass boat I've ever owned in my life. And
it's big in the Midwest. Who was it? McClellan was on that. Was
McClellan,
Skeet on that?
Reese. Yeah, Skeet Reese. You had Marizu Shimizu from Japan, me, and there was one other fellow from the north. I think he was from Ohio. And it was just, man, those were the years. And a lot of people don't understand how these companies can go out of business. But, those bass boat companies really peaked in the 80s, and it's been going downhill ever since. In the 80s, the industry was like 50,000 units, and it has dropped ever since. And if you look at the prices of the boats, you hear people saying, this is out of control. These prices are out of control. If you've ever gone to a bass boat factory and watched it beginning to end, from the office staff to the catalog being produced, to the boats being laid, the engine has to be purchased, the trailer is actually built or purchased. I don't know how these companies survive making, selling a boat for that kind of money. I don't know how they can do it. There's so much involved in building a bass boat, front to end. You got to buy the carpet, and I couldn't understand how they were selling them literally that cheap and still do. And a lot of them they don't make it. They go out of business. If you look at the companies that were around in the 80s and 90s, there is just a fraction of them that exist today.
What, Glastron, Stratus?
Oh my gosh, Dynatrack, Norris Craft, all these companies that are regional companies, Tidecraft. I mean, Astro. The list is long.
Cajun.
Cajun. I had a Cajun. That was my first. That was my first class bass boat was a Cajun. It was the fastest boat I ever owned. It was a 17-foot, 4-inch fiberglass boat with a 150 Merc
Oh
on
my
there.
God, that's like strapping a rocket on the back of a bathtub.
You know what? The guys in this area that were around back then, they still talk about that boat, the Cajun that I had.
That had to be close to a 70-mile-an-hour boat.
Oh, I was scared driving that thing. I was like
sidewalk. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was like 18, 19, just, and of course, when you're that young and you get your first bass boat, it's full throttle everywhere, you know. And well, those were the days. Kind of wish I still had that boat, to be honest with you. But
So
we caught a lot of fish out of it.
It's interesting you say that about the bass boats. You could say that same thing about tackle companies, which we'll get into, because you were actually tinkering and pouring and doing stuff kind of on your own, like when you got onto the Elite Series, correct? Like you've always been kind of a hands-on tinkerer, lead, plastics, let's come up with something unique, even when you were on the Elite Series there from 2006 to 2009.
I started making my own plastics in high school, so it would have been like the late '80s. Started doing hand poured worms when no one in my area ever even heard of a hand poured worm. But I was following guys like Don Iovino and all these guys out in California, looking at all these hand poured reapers and all these things. I was like, man, that's the coolest thing you can do. And so I started hand pouring my own baits, and we'd start making crayfish. And my buddies and I, we were catching tons of fish on these things. So I started selling them to the local tackle stores. And I soon realized that I couldn't compete with Zoom and these other companies that were really starting to grow at that time. Couldn't compete with the price. I couldn't compete with the colors. And so I kind of backed off trying to sell the stuff. And then about 25 years ago, I came up with this idea in my head on the Detroit River of jigging for muskie. So there's a million walleye fishermen in this area that vertical jig, and we drift down the river, but nobody was jigging for muskie, actually trying it. And I just dreamed it up one winter. I was going to go out there, and this was like 2003, 2002, somewhere in there. So I had already been guiding for like 6, 7, 8 years by then, and ended up coming up with this bait here called the Bondy Original. And it's just nothing but a ugly looking giant jig, 7 ounces, and we jig them in the river. And this thing, it's not painted or nothing, has been responsible for about 3 dozen muskie tournament wins, countless personal bests, and it's just a big jig. And ever since then, you know, I think I was on the tour at the time, and Bass Pro Shops sent me an email and said, hey, do you make this jig? And I'm like, I have hit it. I have really made it. Now, when Bass Pro Shops was reaching out to me, soon after that, Cabela's reached out to me, and the rest is history. So this thing's like 25 years old now, and we've got other stuff that we make. We make this is a mini wobbler, but they're basically jigs. And had there been something on the market that was going to do what I wanted it to do, this thing may have never come into existence, you know. And from there, we make panfish baits, walleye baits, bass baits, drop shot baits. We make it all here in town. Nothing is outsourced overseas. One of our biggest selling things right now is one of these with a tail. So it's a big musky bait, and it's got these 2 blades that are on a 3-way swivel. This is the biggest thing we make here. It's about 12 ounces, and these 2 blades spin around the tail. And I wish I had this bait when I was on the tour, because if I could have taken this is the junior one. So it's got 2 spinners like a spinner bait on the back. It's got a tail that rides up high. If I could have made this in like a tilapia color, it's only about 4 ounces, which is a lot lighter than some of them big swim baits. If I could have made this in a tilapia color and took this to Amistad and Falcon the first year we went there, I couldn't tell you what would have happened. I couldn't tell you. It is not that big. It's about the size, a little bit bigger than a hot dog.
It's pretty big, John.
You think it's?
Yeah.
Let me tell you what.
That's a pretty meaty offering, but based on what's been happening, I think a 12-incher would eat it.
Or even Clear Lake. I wonder what the fish on Clear Lake Clear Lake would have thought. We went out there and it was all swim baits. If you weren't throwing a swim bait, you were getting nothing, you know?
So you were
I don't
messing
know.
with
We
these
make all
things
kinds of
while
stuff.
you were on tour. Like while you were on the Elite Series, while you
Well,
were competing, you were spending the
Yeah.
off season building and developing this
Oh, yeah.
bait, because if the timeline kind of goes along with you're a professional bass angler, but you're also, were you guiding for musky at the time then too, or were you just
I've been guiding,
tinkering and enjoyed musky?
No, this is my 32nd year as a guide. And
Oh, wow.
I started out, the first few years was only bass and walleye. And I had a lot of people that did not want to troll for muskie. And that's what St. Clair is known for, is trolling.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, oh, I'm going to start, because I had fished for muskie, but we hadn't guided for them. And it didn't take long to figure it out, you know. And so few years in is when I added muskie, and the rest is history. But this bait was out for 6, 7 years before I even hit the tour. So we had already been making a lot of baits, and but you take all the musky stuff and all this aside, I would give it all up. I would give it all up to have not left the Elite Series.
Really?
If I could have been out there this entire time, it was the greatest. And you can ask them guys when the Elite Series was at its peak, when your standard electronics, flipping and buzz baits and all that played a part. If you look at the guys back then, I mean, those were the legends of the sport, and I would give it all up to go back to those days and be on that tour. And you know, having to leave the tour is one of the worst things that could happen to somebody like me or Charlie, or, you know, guys like that. And it's just the most heartbreaking thing. And for me, it was financial. A lot of guys will come out and they'll say, well, you know, I've got a recurring elbow injury. Trust me, it's financial. When you're spending $5,000 per tournament and traveling to California, and it's $5 a gallon out there, it's always financial, you know. And for me, it was. And I'm not, you know, I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you about the finances of it. I was at Lake Champlain, and I was going to qualify for what was this new tour. And I was talking to Woo Daves' son, Chris Daves, and he said, yeah, there's going to be 11 tournaments. It's going to be $5,000 a tournament. And I said, you are out of your mind. There is no way they would go to that level and that extent. And he's like, I'm telling you, you watch, it's coming. Sure enough, he was right. So I qualified. I finally made it. And it was $55,000 entry fees, American money. I'm from Canada, so American money, getting on that tour, and you had to put $5,000 down to secure your spot. And I spent my whole life working towards this. I approached it like it was an Olympic sport. I was the most single focused. I put off getting married. I put off buying a house. I put off everything. I was solely focused. And you know what? I pulled it off. After 4 years of fishing the opens, I made it. So then I find out you need $5,000 per tournament before expenses just to enter these events. And they had told us the plan was after 3 years that they were going to grow it so much on ESPN and this and that it was going to be free. That was their goal, free to get in. So I was like, okay, I'll sign up. The first year I signed up, Charlie Harley and I went down to Lake Amistad and scouted it. And while I was there, like a couple months prior, I come to the realization that I've put this $5,000 down and I cannot come up with the rest because I could not find a sponsor. So I called Trip Weldon and I said, Trip, I said, I cannot come up with the rest of the money. And I apologized, and I said, can I have my $5,000 back? And he said, absolutely not. You committed to it. We've got all the branding started. You're in all the branding. And he's like, you cannot have the money back. Sorry. So at that point, I looked at Charlie and I said, fine, here's my Visa card. Put the next $10,000 down, because you had to come up with $10,000 for the second
Yeah, they did installments to where you would pay like 10 to 13,000 every like 3 tournaments, and then you'd hope the guys they didn't have it would hope to make it back, and then the money they made would go to the next payment. It was a vicious cycle for 90% of the field.
It was a vicious cycle. So they wanted it all paid before the last few events even started. So you had to commit for the whole season. And I said, "Here's my Visa card. Put $10,000 on." So I did that. The first tournament, I believe we were in Amistad. I was in the money the first day and I fell out. Second tournament, we went to Sam Rayburn and I cashed a check. I caught him on a chatterbait in a creek. And I said to myself,
early chatterbait adopter.
Yep. I said to myself, I just beat Rick Clunn on his lake, Sam Rayburn, where he's historically got a history. And I said, man, take that 10,000, put it on another tournament, a couple more tournaments, and I would live in my truck. And I said to myself, this is absolutely insane. My parents thought I was insane. I was a blue collar family. My parents didn't have any money. So,
but you were loving it?
Oh my gosh. I was living the dream, man. Going from all these famous fisheries. There is very few famous lakes that I didn't fish.
I'm looking at the schedule now, because in the next 2, you went Amistad, Rayburn, Santee Cooper, Gunnersville. Those are your 4. Those are like the pantheon, though. Like if you were to name the top 6 in the country, like outside of maybe throwing Okeechobee in there or a Champlain, like you were hitting the biggest hits right off of the bat. And remind you, that's when Amistad was insane.
And it was a full moon. I remember one time with Preston Clark on that Santee Cooper one. I went in at Rocks Pond where the tournament was won by him, and I saw him in there. And there were no fish in there. There was like 2-pounders in there. And I didn't have the experience on Benham fish that he did, being from Florida. And on the last day of practice, it started to get warm. And he said, I went to the mouth of that creek and the water hit like 60.5 degrees. And he goes, one by one, I seen the giants moving into that area in the back. And of course, I never went back. He went in there and caught 100 pounds of fish.
Yeah, that was the record.
But we went on all these full moons, and it was ungodly, man. Just going to Falcon and Amistad when they were peaking. Oh gosh, it was just. Can you imagine getting on a tour and then they want to make this tour big, so they put us to the biggest fisheries at the best time. You know what I mean? Then then the next year we went to Clear Lake and Kennedy's catching all them 10-pounders and oh my gosh, what a lifetime experience.
And so now that I got a little bit of backstory on that, so you're basically, if I look at this, like when you had to catch them for 2.5 years, you would like catch them either one or a couple tournaments in a row, just enough to keep you going on it. Like, I mean,
you had
story. A top 5 in 06. Yeah, go ahead.
I tell you a story. My dad called me one day. My dad would check my mail in my apartment. He's like, you got like a $10,000 Visa bill here. What are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to get a check in this tournament. So we went to Lake Murray, I believe it was. And it was right after Kenyon Hill had won with that magic swimmer.
Yep, the Sabile.
Yes. And nobody had him. And he had one, and he gave me one. And it was like running crooked. And I went out in that tournament, and it was when the bluebacks were busting on them points and stuff. And I had 3 fish the first day, and I lost 2. So I weighed in 3 fish on that thing, and I was in like 85th place. Second day I went out there, and I caught one. And then the second spot I went to, I see him schooling, I throw it up there. I got a 4-pounder on the front hook, and I got a 3-pounder on the back hook. And I had previously spoken to my co-angler. I said, hey, listen, I said, how are you at landing fish? You worry about getting hooked or... And he's like, I was a saltwater guide. He goes, I've been hooked 1,000 times. And I'm like, this is the best situation that could happen to me. We get out there. He grabs the 4-pounder, and I think I grabbed a 3-pounder. We get these things in the boat. So now in like a half an hour, I got 3 fish. I go like 5-6 hours without another bite. All of a sudden, I got another double. I got a 1 on the front. I got 1 on the back, and they're both like 4 pounds. we get this to the boat, and one of them comes off. I get the other one. I get it in the boat. So now I got 4 fish. So I'm in 85th place now. So we run. I said, we got like 5 minutes left. Let's run and hit this one point over there. I'll never forget this the rest of my life. I throw that Sabile up there. I crank it in. A 3-pounder comes out, grabs it. I swing it in the boat. I cross the finish line with 45 seconds to go. So I get up on that stage and I weigh in, and my roommate is in the 50 cut, so $10,000. He's in the 50th place. I bring that bag up there. I get the last check, $10,000. So 51st, you remember, is nothing.
Yeah, it's a thanks for coming out.
Yeah, 50th, $10,000. I weigh in. I knock my buddy out by 1 ounce. I get the last check by 1 ounce. That's just drops of water in the bag, you know.
Yeah.
So my dad calls. He's like, "Something's going on with the computer. It says you're in 50th place here. What happened there?" I said, "There's nothing wrong with the computer." I said, "I'm going to mail you this check home, and you can pay that Visa bill." And off to the next one we went. And it was just me and living in that truck, man. Living in that truck and put, just sticking it out. Sticking out. I lived my dream. That's for sure.
I remember couple stories that I remember. So the final year, 2009, I have this vivid memory, and it was my first full year. I graduated in 2008, so it was my first full year of covering the Elite Series. And I remember you standing behind stage, and you turned to someone you were next to and you said, "If I get knocked out of this cut, I'm done."
Yep.
And you ended up missing the cut by like 7 ounces.
Yeah.
And then
Gerald Swindle.
You go back and look at it, and your first 3 events that year, you were I did the math here, probably much to your chagrin now, but I remember it because it shows the reality of how hard it is to do this. You were 2 pounds and 7 ounces away from $30,000, and you finished 58th, 52nd, and 55th.
Anybody that's going to go out there on a tour needs to look at the realities like that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's changed immensely now, but back then, you're talking big money. For someone like me who's blue collar, just been a fishing guide. I'd never worked full time anywhere. I'd just been a guide. My parents were blue collar. You better have guts to get out there if you're going to be blowing that kind of cash. But in my position, it was my life dream. I had to do it. There was no going back. I'll never forget the first year we went to Amistad, first tournament. I slept at the hotel that Byron Velvick owned.
Yeah.
I was in the parking lot.
Lake Resort.
I was in the parking lot, plugged into their lights, plugged into their plugging in my boat, but I was sleeping in the truck.
Yeah.
And Ray Sedgwick come up to me at the meeting.
There's a
This
name.
is my first Elite event. And he says to me, he goes, "John, boy," he goes, "did I see you sleeping in your truck out there last night?" And I said, "Yeah." And he looked at me and he goes, "You need to go home." He goes, "You don't need to be out here on this tour." And I was like, I appreciate your thoughts, but I ain't going home. I ain't going home. In 3.5 years, I stuck it out there. And he did put me up one time. Went to Santee Cooper, and he's like, "You're going to stay in one of my cabins." He had this little waterway place, and he put me up for a while, staying at his cabin. And guys like that are what made the tour,
Yeah.
Guys like that those are the guys that I don't forget. Ray Sedgwick, Mickey Bruce, all these guys from my history that are gone now. They're gone from the tour. Danny Brower. I mean, and that's the thing that troubles me the most about where everything is gone, especially electronics, is and you can ask Charlie about this and and all these guys that talk about it. Randy Blockett. Randy Blockett's been posting these Anger of the Year stats from like 94, and you look at the names, and it's like every one of those guys is my hero from when I was a teenager to 20s. And they're all leaving. They've passed away. those are the guys, the gentlemen, the heroes that built the sport. They built the sport, and they're all leaving. So what does that say? I mean, guys that they're not old they're not old enough to retire, these
Yeah.
guys. They're not at that point, but they're leaving the sport, and it's heartbreaking to watch the guys that are leaving. And I'm not going to criticize anything, the electronics or anything. I just think that the legends who built Bassmasters are gone now.
Mm-hmm.
And so where does it leave it? You know,
Yeah,
I
we're in
don't
an
know.
interesting transition period. I went fishing with Randy earlier this year, John. I drove up to Table Rock and
No kidding.
I got Randy on the spaceship, and he caught his first live scope fish with me. And we
Oh
had
my gosh.
you got to watch it. We had like a 3 or 4 hour discussion. We were all mic'd up. It was really cordial. I'm in a weird in between phase, right? So, I ran with Harold Allen, who recently just passed away.
Yep.
And Mark Jeffries, friends with a bunch of the older dudes. I'm 41 right now. I turned 42 in a couple weeks. I love live scope. I also love flip and pitch and crank, and I love everything. But this is another story I want to ask you about. But throwing a Carolina rig, I hate a Carolina rig, but that's just me personally. But I legitimately see both sides of it. I get if I do stuff on live scope, I get the haters that talk about that. If I do, but I genuinely see both sides of it. I did mention the Carolina rig. I also remember, was it Grand Lake? There was I don't know why I remember this, but I remember, do you know where I'm going with this?
Is this the one where I threw a sinker?
Yes, you went and pre-practiced for an event, and all you did was throw a 1 ounce sinker for like 3 days.
No.
With
I'll tell you the whole story. We left California, and we had a week off between going from California to Texas, I believe it was. And I stopped at Grand Lake, and it's a structure lake in June, right? So it was cold. I was wearing my survival suit that I wear up here in the winter.
It's what, 2006, 2005, 2006, 2007,
something like that.
That time frame.
2007, I believe. And I took a flipping stick with 65-pound, 80-pound braid on it, and I put a 1 ounce tungsten weight, and below it I put a swivel. And I went from dawn till dusk, and I cast that tungsten weight for 7 straight days. You would not believe the catfish that I had on that sinker. They would be covered in slime. I'd fight them for a while. They wouldn't let it go.
They just eat the weight.
Oh yeah. But the reason I was doing that was to find brush piles that guys had put out the old-fashioned way. There was no live scope. There was no side imaging. And that 7 days, I located 65 offshore brush piles and had them all GPSed. And I said to myself, if I do well in this event, this is going to make a story. And what happened was, if you remember, we had the flood of the century. Yep. And they almost canceled the event. Do you remember the marinas that were so full of wood, you couldn't even get in the marinas? The water went up about 10 feet.
Yeah, that was where they were all flipping out of Echo Bay. Kevin Short was in there. Guys were in there, and it turned into a willow derb, but it was still one offshore.
That tournament everything turned chocolate mud. Every brush pile I had 10 feet of chocolate mud over top. And what a waste, dude. What a waste. But it sure made for a good story. People were like, "You're doing what now? You're throwing a sinker?" I said, "I threw a sinker, and I found 65 brush piles that guys had put out. And I still have those waypoints. I don't know, near Cedar or whatever. They're probably gone now, but
20 years later.
Dude, what a story that would have made if that would have panned out. My buddies thought I was crazy. But I'm like, yeah, how many brush piles you got? And then a week before that, I'll never forget that how much wood was in that place. I don't even know how they got rid of it all. There was so much wood. People's entire front lawns were just laden with 3-foot wide logs.
It comes out of that Neosho and the elk, and it just will make a big reef of wood, and then it'll all just go to the bank and disappear. But I mean, when it comes up that fast and they start pulling water, it gets treacherous out. There's been more than one lower units that sometimes they'll have a turn. The conditions will be fine, but they can't get around the bridge. Everything just clogs up right there.
What a place. That's one of my favorite places, Grand Lake. I got to check there. I got to check there one time. I'll tell you how it happened. I always see the year, the first time we went there, I always see Ike and Ellie, the last boat out of the water in practice. Just the hardest working dude, right? And it was a
It
year
still
he
is.
won, and he it was a year he won Angler of the Year. And it was a year that I think he fell out of the boat or jumped out of the boat on Table Rock. Anyways, I'm like, I'm gonna be like Ike Canelli. I'm gonna go until the sun is down, man. I'm gonna bust my and one of my last few casts of that tournament in the practice, I caught a bass on a crankbait, deep water crankbait. He's like, well, that's all I got. I ran back there and won $10,000 off that spot throwing a DD22 Norman crankbait. So it's like, had I not taken that mindset and stayed out till it was literally almost dark, like Ike and Ellie was doing, I wouldn't have got that check, you know. And that's the kind of I remember Roland Martin. They asked him, well, how do you be successful in these tournaments? And all he said was, "Come early and stay late." You know,
Yeah.
and those things they sit in your mind, and it's like I remember another quote from Rick Clunn. This is one that I've never forgot. Everybody said, everybody complains about the wind around Lake St. Clair, and you know it's terrible. I said, you know, Rick Clunn said, zip up your hoodie and let others worry about the weather. You go fish. And I've never forgot that. When you want to put that boat on a trailer, because it's get your butt out there and fish. If you're
Look up
practicing
and
for a
fish.
tournament or whatever, you got no reason to be giving up on
Yeah.
nothing, you know. And that's another legend, man. Rick Clunn, gosh, he just turned 80. I just grew up worshiping that guy, man. I try to emulate everything he did and ended up, you know, becoming friendly with the guy when I was on a tour. And I told him flat out, I said, man, you're like one of the reasons I'm actually out here is just you know when he won them four classics and just you just see them guys dropping out, man. Larry Nixon, I mean, you just yeah, he just
I waited in line at the Bassmaster Classic to buy that hat and get Rick's autograph the last time he was there. And,
I
you know,
love Rick,
I
man. He's
played
such
poker with
he's
Rick and stuff. And he's like, "Why?" I said, "Dude," I said, "I need one of these. Like, this has to be in the studio. Like, this is like the felt hat with the Rick. I mean, like,
yep.
dude, he's
This
the freaking GOAT."
so let me ask you this: you've been around. Who's the best of all time? Because I'm telling you what, you cannot look at Jacob Wheeler and go, he's second, third, or fourth. He is not second, third, or fourth. I look at Aaron Martin's Clun and Van
Yeah.
Dam and Jacob Wheeler. Out of those
Depends on
four,
what you value. What you
yeah,
value. What do they give to the sport? What their accomplishments are, career earnings, tournament wins. Like it just that's like why ESPN exists, because they can have shows on who's the greatest baseball, basketball, hockey, football
yeah.
player of all time. It just
But
totally
there's
depends, because you could make a case for four or five guys, and fishing is so unique, John, and that there's so much more, you know, how much do you put like what they've given to the sport versus as accomplishments? We're in the stick and ball sports. I think it's more so what's on the ice, what's on the court, what's on it,
yeah,
how many championships they have. I mean, you could look at Wheeler and his percentages and stuff and then say, well, how many Bass Angler of the Years and Bassmaster Classic titles does he have? And then you can look
yeah.
at the different generations and genres. It's a really unique. I think it's almost impossible. It's a really good debate to have if you have a podcast and a show that
If
talks
you
about it 200
if you
times a
look
year.
yeah, if you look up Roland Martin when he was doing them Angler of the Years back
Yeah,
then,
9 of them.
or you can look just guys like these guys that these youngsters don't even know, like George Cochran. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that dude was
Gentleman
on.
George.
Oh, he was on fire, man. For how long? Larry Nixon, dude.
Yeah.
Larry Nixon, are you kidding me? I would when I was a kid, he would have been one or two, top one or two.
Yep.
You know, nicest guy in the world. And there's just so many grinders, man. It's just, but give Wheeler another 10 years at
Yeah.
this pace that he's doing right now. At this pace, I'm
He's
not even sure Aaron Martins or somebody like that could have done that. I mean,
it's insane.
and
You
now
mentioned
If Aaron Martins wouldn't have had them seconds in the classics, we'd be talking about him being two, three, which for natural ability, he's one or two for sure.
yeah.
You know,
You talk to anybody that fishes and they
just
put Aaron in the top 2.
I feel richer as a human being just to have known Aaron as a person, saw him treat me like a brother, just to have had him for a glimpse, a small section of my life, have that dude in my life just as a friend. I, it's just one of the richest things that could ever happen to a bass angler, And it's just why that dude, man? Like it's just
Mm-hmm. You talk
just
about a legacy, like
oh
the definition of legacy. That's Aaron. It's I say this on the show, John. It's amazing. I'll talk. You haven't been on tour since 2009. You own a musky bait company. I'll talk to Tucker Smith, who's 24 years old now. I'll talk to someone, a Pete Robbins in the industry, who's an outdoor rider. It's amazing in 2026 how often Aaron comes up organically in the natural conversations on how much he meant, how much he gave, and how much of an impact he still has. And here's the crazy part. Some of it'll be on the water where guys will be like, oh, this is this. Just as much of it is off the water stuff with Aaron. And you don't hear that about other anglers. A lot of it's like, this guy taught me this or took me under his wing. Like the off the water stuff that Aaron had on the entire industry, the individual relationships were just as important as the on the water impact he had, developing baits, techniques, working with people, jumping in guys' boats, being friends with them. I mean, yeah, that's a great point.
He's still, I have a little tackle shop here in my little factory here, and he's still on the Gamakatsu hooks, and he's in the Gamakatsu catalog, and I can't even look, dude. I can't even like when his birthday comes up and stuff like that and it gets posted, I'm just like, man, like what a tragedy. Outside of Brian Kirchhoff, who the youngsters don't even know. I got a Brian Kirchhoff fish whistle. Somebody
there it is right there, John.
Yeah, I got one still in the package, man.
Yeah,
somebody gave it to me. I thought and I still remember it to this day, watching the news when Brian Kirchhoff, somebody said on the news that there was a world champion bass fisherman on this plane, and I thought, oh my, who is that? I saw it on the news, didn't know who it was at the time, and it turned out it was Brian, and the fact that he didn't like to fly, and man, if I remember at the time, he was the only reigning champion of any pro sport in the world who had died in his reigning year. Was Brian Kirchhoff,
I know Polinick did a great job of bringing that back in 2010, 2011, that time there when he was going up against KVD, I believe in the Katawachi or Chattahoochee. He had the fish whistle going. And then for the first time since 1994, we had a Bass Nation angler that won the Classic this past year, and he was also in his young 20s too. So, but there's still some guys, like some of those young guys, you'd be surprised, are still, some of them are now we'll have an old person talk here. Some of them are naive, they don't understand it. But I'm also impressed with, there's Kyle Patrick's, there's younger guys who really do appreciate and understand the history of the sport. And I think that's, important.
Let me ask you this, in that vein, with all the new electronics, where is the tackle industry headed? I mean, how many buzz baits, flipping jigs, crankbaits are being sold nowadays compared to the 90s and the 80s? If I had a flipping jig company, I'd be like, man, this is all collapsing around me. And so what do you think's the state of the tackle business from this electronics? I mean, I had a mold made recently for a production mold, because we make a lot of plastic worms too.
Oh yeah.
And I had this mold. I had this mold made, and I told the girl, I said, I'm sure you're happy to do something different instead of making little minnow shaped stuff. And she's like, yes, I am. I've been seeing so much of this come across the computer. But like, where is that industry headed? Where, like, if you own a big tackle store, you're going to have dust collecting on Zara spooks and everything else,
Yeah, it's interesting. And, we're going with different formats. It's 50-50 on the Elite Series now. You've got the MPFL that's no scope. You have the 2 periods with Major League Fishing that you can't use a scope. There's definitely a transition going on. You're seeing a lot of the companies now with the urchin style baits completely jumping on, which then brings in a lot of terminal tackle and a lot of other baits. So in a way, I think forward facing has opened up an entirely new category of baits that weren't traditional, that is allowing certain companies, smaller manufacturers, even bigger manufacturers to tap into something that never existed before. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you could talk to any hard bait traditional manufacturer and they would go, yeah, our deep diving crankbaits are flying off the shelves. But I think also as you get more and more into it, you're also realizing, oh, you've got guys that can scope with a 6XD or a 10XD, or guys that can scope with a jerk bait, or you've got Tyler Williams, whose predominant bait is a 3/4 ounce ugly jig with a trailer on it, and he's putting it on stumps with forward facing. So I think, this is just my opinion, John, I think maybe the first couple years there was a little bit overreaction of, oh my God, we're never going to sell a traditional moving flipping bait again. This thing is totally toast.
Yeah.
And now as it's kind of coming back, we're seeing, okay, there's still a place in the market for this. There's still, and it's slowly coming back as the organizations are kind of organizing as to, forward facing heavy, not forward facing heavy, and how we're seeing fish that are now reacting to a minnow differently than they did 2 years ago, where it was a 90% conversion rate. Now it's down to a 40 or 50% conversion rate. And you're a generation of fish in that, want a jerk bait or want a jig, or maybe you have to crank them to get a reaction bite. So I think it's slowly starting to come back around, but it definitely has taken a hit.
What do you think about these the guys that are claiming that the fish are getting scared by that pinging off that forward face, and then they're kind of repositioning and changing their habits and all that? What do you think of that?
I definitely think they are. I don't know if it's the pinging, if it's the boat noise, if it's the vibration or the movement of the bait that they're getting used to. But I mean, you cannot deny the fact. We'll take Table Rock, for instance. You've had some good tournaments on Table Rock. When that 4 or 5 years ago, you would go out, you could sail a minnow 30 feet up in the air, plunk it on the water. It would start sinking. You'd watch them swim up and eat it. Now, if that thing makes so much as a chew, those things will shoot off. Like, you still have the instances where they're in bait balls, where they're aggressively feeding where you get them. But like, there is a noticeable difference across the country of fish that are becoming conditioned to it. Yeah. And I think it's just like any other bait. Like, you look at the Whopper Plopper when it came out, the Alabama rig in 2010-11 when Paul Elias came out with it. You could even maybe say so as a chatterbait, still effective because you can use it and change the vibrations of it and fish it in a number of different ways. But I mean, you cash a check on that in 2006. There's a couple years there where, man, you just cast a chatterbait out, reel it in, and the thing would get trucked. I think it's just the natural evolution of it, of how those fish survive. But yeah, I just got back from Champlain and I sucked, but that was my fault because I sent a boat up on the only sandbar and probably had to be the only guy that planned on fishing 80 foot of water that spent an hour pushing the boat off a sandbar.
Where was that? Where was a sandbar at?
I tried to get into the north end of Mallets.
Oh boy. Okay.
The lake was a foot low and I got under the first flat, and then in the hole in the bridge, I got it up there and I'd gone in the south end in practice and went from the inland sea in, and then was like, oh, I'm on Champlain up to my knees pushing the boat out. But anyway, I'm just saying, I noticed those fish from 2 years ago when I went that would eat it with reckless abandon, that were coming up and nipping or turning away or casted to it. So I think it's just a natural progression of fish. Have you noticed that with the musky and the Bondy bait on St. Clair at all? Like, from I guess the first initial times on it to now, they're not as aggressive towards it, or you have to change the cadence, or you have to come out with the little tweaks?
Not really. I think muskie are more of an apex predator than anything else. I don't think they care about any of it, to be honest with you. Most of my time, I'm vertical jigging Detroit River. So we got it vertical, and we're going 2 miles down in the river, 2 mile an hour. And so by the time you see a fish on the life scope, it's in and out. Like, you can't react and make them bite because all you're doing is being able to watch them hit the bait. But you're not, able to, because you're in, 25, 30 feet of water, just vertical. You're going so fast down the river. It doesn't play a huge part where I fish, in Detroit River. St. Clair, a lot of it, you were using it to find shad and pods of shad and stuff like that. And a lot of guys using it for bass. The bass definitely have gotten used to it, I think. St. Clair has been off this year. Obviously, Erie is not off, but St. Clair's been pretty off this year. So I don't know. I remember when I was a kid talking about transducers, I used to think that they were attracted to the ticking. When I was a kid, we went scuba diving and or just snorkeling up north, and I took a couple of rocks and I tapped them together, and all these bass and bluegill came and sat right in front of me where I was tapping these two stones together. So they were curious what that was. And I remember one time we were in the Bassmaster out of Buffalo, and I was using literally the old graphs, and you would see I had a big 10-inch grass, but you would see whenever I was fishing, and you would get, and I don't know if it was a shadow of the boat or if it was the ticking of that transducer on the foot of that trolling motor, but they would come off the bottom in 30 feet and they would hang about maybe 12 feet below the trolling motor tick, and they would hang there, they would stop. And every single time I reeled up to them with that drop shot, I'd catch them every time. But it was almost like when I was a child, I think that they were interested on what that tick, 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 tick. So they come up like this and they just kind of hang. And they weren't hanging in the dark part of the boat. They were
Yeah.
hanging right under the foot of the trolling motor. And I think they were attracted to the ticking. Now, this might be a different hertz or whatever it is that is, going back and forth. Some of this might be freaking them out. But
Remember
yeah,
that thing?
yeah.
The old
Oh my,
Hydra Wave?
is that still available?
It's still available, yeah. I mean, this has the KVD patch in it, but I mean that
Oh
was
my gosh.
that was all sorts of ticking and gurgling and blooping and all sorts of stuff back
Why
in the
is
day.
it there? Why is it there and not on your boat? Let me ask you that.
I don't know. I've thought about it. I've thought about throwing one back on, but I mean, there's part of me that thinks maybe bring it back, and there's part of me that also thinks, damn, that was some good marketing.
You know what? I knew the guy that kind of came. I knew the guy that came up with it,
Dr. Lauren Hill.
and this no, that was a color selector.
Didn't
This was
Lauren
another
Hill?
doc.
Okay.
This was another doctor in Michigan, and he had got a patent on digitally recording sounds in nature. And he told me that this unit, boy, you ice fish or whatever, you flip it on, and the fish just all of a sudden they start biting. And his guy's stories were way over the top, of how you put on the crayfish one, and when you're in the rocks and hear the fish come, and I'm like, well, you got to get me one of these things. I never did own one, but the fact that the color selector, I remember when the color selector come out, Bass Pro Shops came out with these. You could get your tiny torpedo and your Rebel crankbaits and all of them, and they had all the colors, like 12 colors of the rainbow, and you had to have the whole pack. You didn't dare buy one of them. You had to buy the color selector, and you had to have every color of every bait. It was the most bright, like
You match it with the
fluorescent,
color selector. You
and you
drop the
turn
color
on.
selector in the water, and it would say this color. You put that color on, and
And they had the pH meter too. They started talking
yep,
about, well, the pH is off. That's why we're not catching them in the creek. You got to put the pH meter down here. And that had some validity, I think. pH is
yeah,
everything. We got to leave the creek because the pH is off. Yeah, but the color selector says they're biting chartreuse. Well, I don't have any chartreuse, and I don't know. There's so many things like that they're all good ideas, or they wouldn't have been on the market.
yeah.
They're all solid ideas, but
So you talked about the body bait. This is an old video that's out on YouTube. So just for people to know, so just horizontal jigging.
jigging,
Watch
yeah.
this.
Yeah,
This is the wildest thing ever. This is not traditionally how the muskies had been fished for.
So I'm using an 8-foot rod with 80-pound braid on there and steel leader, and
Watch
we're
this.
jigging.
Boom!
That's the flipper in me right there. And you know what? All my big ones, that's how I catch them. I catch them jigging deep, and that's just what I got known for. And guys were like, I don't even know that you were even a bass fisherman. I just thought you were a musky guy, or I thought you were a walleye guy, I'm like, no, man, I was on the bass tour. I blew all my money out like everybody else out there. And it's interesting when people come up and say, I didn't know I did a real long in fisherman interview, like a 2 hour podcast on in fishermen a couple years ago. And people were like, I had no idea that if your bass fishing history, but I like fish for everything.
Yeah.
I fished for carp. I fished for catfish. You know, I fished for all that stuff. And that's how one time I read in a magazine, Gary Klein, when I was a kid, he had said, if you want to be a tournament fisherman, you want to be a good bass fisherman, fish for everything. Because just getting bites is going to make you a better bass fisherman. Just get bites, doesn't matter what it is. And as I went on a tour, the tour had progressed so much that I didn't feel that helped me at all, because guys like Swindle and all these guys were bed fishing for months at a time. We didn't do that up here in the north. They were fishing for bass all year, nothing else. And so my pike fishing experience meant nothing. It was all, if you didn't, bass, everything else didn't matter. Catfish didn't matter. None of it mattered when you're on the tour. Getting bites, you had to be a solid bass fisherman that fished hundreds of days a year. That's how you were going to make it, you know. But
Right.
those are the days, man.
Here's where I want to draw the parallel. So I'm sure you're familiar with this monster right here. That's a little one. That's the urchin style bait that's blowing up. But I say that to say this. As you know, you weren't on the Elite Series anymore, and you still talked to Charlie, your name came up and stuff, but it seemed like there was a time where your Bondy bait, that one that's right in front of you right now, became the koiki of the musky world. And
you know what?
It seems like it kind of still is. Like it seems, and I don't musky fish, I'm not in that world, but you hear things, you see articles, you browse it, and I have read and seen so many things where it's like, this bait is the only bait to be musky fishing with, and then the lake trout guy, and then everything, and it absolutely took the entire industry by storm. Well, I'm asking the question. You don't have to be humble with it. That's a pretty fair comparison to what's happening with the koiki now as to what happened when that Bondy bait finally really kind of grabbed hold, right?
I tell you, when it first come out, I was just going to keep it a secret. I wasn't even going to sell it. I just wanted it for my own use on Detroit River. And I was asking my customers, hey, don't tell anybody about this, what we're doing, what we're using, because I don't want anybody using it. And then I had some business-minded customers, and I said, should I put this on the market? And they're like, this thing is so good. There's something about it. It's so good. And it's basically, I filled a vacuum. There were no big jigs for that would hook up fish and where fish would stay hooked, And I decided to put it on the market. So I started selling it, and a lot of guys were fishing for deep fish, for lake trout, a lot of southern reservoirs. You go through West Virginia, Kentucky, places like that. Guys jig for muskie when it gets hot. Same with like Wisconsin, certain lakes like Pewaukee Lake and lakes like that in Wisconsin. The guys jig in the summer, and there's really was nothing out there. And so then the lake trout thing took off. And now that's 40-50% of my business, guys, all through the Northwest Territories. They're all jigging Bondies. It's one of the top baits you can get. And I'll tell you something. If you go up to Canada and fish, you will find three baits for lake trout. You find this, you find the Daredevil spoon, and you find a quick fish or a flat fish. All three of them were invented on the Detroit River where I live.
Wow.
So it took off. And go ahead.
I was just saying, so this is unique, and you don't have to get into this. I don't if you don't want to or anything, but it seems like this is still your company, your bait, like no OEM. It hasn't been bought by a, like you've tried to keep up with all of it. You've grinded your ass off to stay with it. It's your product. You own it, ship it, have it out of your store, the whole 9 yards. It's not one of those things where you built it and then offloaded it to a giant OEM.
No, we got a 5,000 square foot facility here, and we got a couple injection machines, and I got employees. And the last thing this thing will be done, the last thing that will happen to this bait, we'll see it made overseas. I don't buy, the only thing overseas on this bait are these French VMC hooks. Everything else, the plastic, the lead, the wires from Missouri, everything is domestic, and it's always been that way. And it's worked in my favor because when I see all my competitors getting hit with tariffs, fishing lures like this are covered under the trade agreements between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. So none of my customers in the United States or Canada have ever paid any tariffs on any of these baits that we
You've
make.
had to have some wild offers, though. There's no way that a bait's that popular in it where you haven't had some offers where someone's like, you're like, holy cow, that's a lot of zeros. And I'd be like, good to go and still be making money on this thing. Like this, at this point, has to be a labor of love.
Well, I can't keep up with my large orders. And when I do, then I'll get an idea of the value of the company. As of right now, I'm only 53. I got nothing else going on besides guiding. So we're just going to continue cranking them out. I can't even tell you how many of these sold. We're close to 1 million of these just individual model. Like we make this in 3 sizes. This thing here though, with the tail has been the one that has really been hard to keep up. Everybody wants these things right now. I'm selling them all over North America, especially Minnesota, Wisconsin. Those are probably the 2 biggest markets. And I'm trying to get more molds and just trying to just somehow make it all happen and grow the company. And we're one of the biggest. I think we're one of the biggest as far as volume of plastic that I go through. My plastic comes from the States. My parts are all from the States. My wires from Missouri. And people appreciate that you're keeping it all domestic, and we've been domestic all this time. I even have a braid now. We have Bondy braid out there. It's also domestic, made in the United States. I could have easily gone to China or somewhere else, but I'm not going to do that. I don't believe in that. So that's what we've built our brand around, So right now I'm in a growth stage that is just straight up. We're just trying to keep up, we're just trying to keep up. And it's interesting because I am the only large company that makes large baits anywhere, Europe, Canada, United States, anywhere, that still doesn't paint anything. We can't make these things fast enough, and we don't put any paint on them whatsoever. So if we do ever catch up, you might see custom paint jobs, but then it would just explode. I would sell 50% more if I did that. But where we get creative with powders and dyes and flake and stuff like that. And we're not painting, not yet, so
John, I'm looking at this bait and I'm looking at what's going on in the bass industry. You still keep up with the bass industry. I see a minnow here. I see a jigging spoon. I see a swim bait. I see an odd shape that seems to be taking over the bass fishing. Okay.
See this thing here?
I see
this
that
is
thing.
1.5 ounces. We make one that's 9 ounces. We make a 4.5. This is a 1.5 ounce. It's called a Bondy Ultra. And I could not make these things fast enough. Guys are using them for ice fishing, for pike and lake trout. Last winter, thousands of them we've sold. And I wonder if I would have had this on a tour, what role that would have played. It's kind of like an old Little George a little bit, but a different shape.
You sell that for $10?
Yeah. Yep. $10. Can't make them fast enough.
So what I'm saying, like, what's the fall rate on that?
It's 1.5 ounces, but it's got a lot of plastic on there. Like a foot per second type of thing. We've specialized and we've built our company around jigs primarily. Yeah. And this thing here has shocked me. This thing, once we go through another winter of this bait, it's going to be one of the most popular baits.
The bass guys haven't caught on. The bass guys are. You don't.
You could throw this on. You could throw this on Lake Erie all day. It's cast like a rattle trap. It casts like a country mile. It's called a Bondy Ultra. And
when it falls, how does it fall? Does the tail spin?
It'll fall flat like this. It'll fall kind of sort of like this, and then the tail spins like this. And then this is the 4 ounce. So you could also
fish it in the mid water column for suspended fish.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I haven't even touched this. My friends that help out here, my one buddy Dennis, who's a retired teacher, and he's a big fisherman. He's wanted to call this the franchise because he thinks the company is going to be built on this product right here. And if the sales of last winter or it's a new bait, but if the sales of last winter are any indication, this should have been called a franchise, because once this thing gets in more stores and gets out there, I tried telling these stores out west in Alberta, I'm like, you're ordering stuff, but you're not ordering the best selling product yet. This is the one,
I
you know.
feel
And
like you're one live stream Elite Series BPT tournament weekend away from that being an absolute grand slam in the bass
Could
game.
you imagine? Could you imagine if I had something on the Elite Series, like a chatterbait or something that I had invented? I mean, I would love to just be paid, um, just pay me to make lures. Just
Well, that's what
pay
you're
me to
doing.
make lures. But I mean,
Oh, no.
design them.
Yeah,
Just design them. And let one of these companies just hire me and pay me six figures a year, and I would just design lures all day, and I would be happy. You know what I mean? There's something about creating a product that fish want to run down. You know, I never forget the first time I was using my musky jig and I saw somebody out there fishing in the river, and I saw them reel up my lure on their boat, and I'm like, that guy just went and paid money for something that I created. I cannot believe that. And then all these years later, it's just, I don't even know where it'll be. Like, if I could make everything I have orders for, I don't even know where it would end up.
Bondyfishing.com is the website for those who want to go check it out, and you can look at all the craziness out there. And I mean, you've got really good, tube heads for bass and jigs and walleye, bucktails, all the typical musky stuff. But one of the reasons I wanted to get you on was I think you've experienced that boom with your bait through that. But I'm shocked that bait, and I've had conversations with guys about it. I'm surprised that bait and, that bait hasn't sneakily taken off in the bass game yet.
Field and Stream and In Fisherman called it one of the most important lures of the last decade. When you have that kind of, and it is so drab. Most of the things, how I approach the bait business is I make things that are tools. They're not designed to catch fishermen. That's why we don't paint them. They're tools, and they're tools for a specific situation, a specific time. And that's how I approach it. And once guys figure out that this bait works and it's a tool, like say, I wish I created bass baits that would be just sell millions of them. That's what I would love to do.
I think you might have, John.
But yeah,
you just don't know it yet.
The Ultra, you never know. Like, I've got, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but I've got a 3-inch version of this.
Well, have you ever caught smallmouth on that version?
Oh, we've caught smallmouth on this. We get smallmouth, walleye, everything on these big boys. But let me tell you, I got one of these that is that big, and only about 2 people have seen it. And so I don't know where I'm going. I gave it to a customer. I gave one to a customer. He took it to the Northwest Territories, and it got absolutely destroyed by everything that swam near it. And I don't know what's going to happen with that bait, but that could be a bait for bass, big time.
Dude, there's a lot of St. Clair bass derbies. There's opens that you could hop in. There's Toyota series. Do you ever get the itch to throw down $1,500 and show up at 4:30 in the morning and drop the boat in and smell the morning and the takeoff and see all the lights and get back in the derby scene?
I think the last tournament I fished was FLW Open on St. Clair. There was there was no locals in it. It was $4,000 to get in. There was hardly any locals in this thing. And that was the last tournament I fished. I was in the top 20, I think, 10 or 20. But I miss it immensely. I really do miss it immensely, but it's not the Elite Series. And when you're on the Elite Series and you're treated like you're a PGA professional, like they did back then, I don't know. I for the first couple of years after getting off the Elites, I had fished the Opens with this wild-eyed dream of requalifying. And the year that I dropped out mid-season. Okay. The next fall, Trip Weldon called me and said, "Hey, we want you back. We have a spot for you." I said, "Trip, I dropped out halfway through the year without a medical exemption or anything." I said, how's that going to work? He goes, well, you have a place. If you want back on the elites for this following year, you have a place. And I said, Trip, you and I both know what guys will say. That I was able to just sneak out and come back when I'm financially ready. I said, you know exactly what guys will say, and I don't want to do it that way. I want to requalify. And so he accepted that, and decided not to do it. And to this day, they've never called me again.
Yeah, now they're cutting guys and keeping it.
You know what? And the year after that, I think that was the year that they started just taking whoever they could get. He didn't even have to qualify.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't like the way this is going. You know what I mean? And granted, they didn't let the bums in. They let, just top-notch anglers get in there. And, it worked. But I don't know, man. Those were the best period of my life. And I would give this entire company away just to have never quit, And I think, personally, I don't know if I would have gotten an invite to MLF, but I would have stuck with Bassmasters. Bassmasters brought it, a lot of guys make a lot of promises about this and that. Bassmasters built the sport. That's where I think a lot of these guys should have stayed. They might disagree with me on that, but you see the guys dribbling, dripping back to the Bassmasters. They should have never left. And it would, it was just the Bassmasters. When you're a kid, everybody, whether they were a fisherman or not, had at least heard of the Bassmasters.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And I know you wish you were out there on the elites.
I'm still trying. Well, John, I enjoyed the heck out of this conversation. That was fantastic. Check out Bondy BAITS, and it was great catching up with you, dude.
Bondy fishing and that. Yeah, man. We're on Infish. We're on Instagram, Facebook, all at Bondy Bait Company. And man, I really appreciate the opportunity to just talk about the good old days and take from this. Don't forget them guys that built the sport. Those are the legends. Those are the guys to respect. Those are the guys that I grew up and we all grew up worshiping. You talk to Charlie about the legend, Tommy Biffle, Danny Brower, Sheffield. Those guys, man, they meant the world to me and still do.
That's good stuff. All right. I'd like to get you back on. Maybe with Charlie. Tell some more stories, dude.
Oh my gosh. He was my roommate. And don't forget, he's being inducted into the Ohio Bass Fishing Hall of Fame soon.
Oh, yeah.
Bill Lowen. Bill Lowen, too.
Yep. Two good guys. All right, John, I appreciate it. I'll let you get back to it. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Good to hear from you.
All right. See you. All right. I think we're going to wrap it up from there. Great story. Jon Bondy, good dude, obviously. Passion for the sport. We'll be back another BTL tomorrow. We'll talk to everyone then. See ya.